Yeah, I hope you all are having a great day. Today's session is FHIR Implementation Guide benefits for software developers, and I am Junaid Siddiqui, your host. This is hosted by Oliver Ecker. So feel free to take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Oops. I'm looking forward for this presentation. It came out of a SULIP discussion. What are the benefits if you have an implementation guide as a computable specification? And I'm quite a few years already active in developing software applications and specifications around interoperability standards. For example, like AIG, and we used in the beginning Word documents, then we used PDF documents for specifications, and now we are also moving to implementation guides as a construct to do this specification. And I personally, as a software developer, I like this very much because I get a lot out of it, of these different things, and I hope I can bring this over to you in the next 30 minutes. Who from you is a software developer actually? Wow, cool. Because sometimes we have only authors in the standardization organization, so I'm very happy to get the feedback from you afterwards. Who of you had already used a FHIR implementation guide as a base for a project? And a bit less. Does everybody know what a FHIR implementation guide is? More or less, perfect. You should know it afterwards. So that's what I want to go through with you. What can I expect from an implementation guide as a software developer? And what are the benefits of computable FHIR specifications? And I would like first a bit to introduce you what can I expect from an implementation guide. And there is a huge variety. So there can be a lot of things in the implementation guide. There can only be a little. And we will go through a little bit of these different things. I will show it with one of an implementation guides. There are hundreds, but they are most similar. So you will see very soon what kind of concept you can expect. And we go through the benefits. You see here a few examples of FHIR implementation guides. There can be FHIR implementation guides from HL7 itself, the International Patient Summary guide, for example. Here there can be national implementation guides like from the UK. There can be project-specific implementation guides. You have quite a lot of these implementation guides. And the background why we have FHIR implementation guide is FHIR is a platform specifications. So you can build a lot of different solutions and exchange this with the API, all these things. But we have some other use cases too. We have national standards, we have vendors, we have use cases where we want to describe more specifically how we want to use FHIR in a particular data exchange or for a particular problem. And then such an implementation guide is a set of rules how we can use these FHIR resources for this particular problem, and also it's documented how we can do that. And we have two different types. So first we have the content, where it's described how that implementation has to look like. And these are most of the time conformance resources, specifying what restrictions we have, what kind of terminology use, etc. And then on the other hand, I think that's already one of the huge advantages of FHIR implementation guide. We have examples. Sometimes examples have a bad reputation, but if I can start from an example and look as a developer how that works, I think this brings quite a lot of added value. And if you just Google programming by examples, you get a search result, which is incredible. I think we are not off that FHIR implementation guide provides examples. And in addition to content examples, we have documentation, how we can use FHIR implementation guides. And this is kind of this dual life a FHIR implementation guide has. You have a human readable documentation of your FHIR implementation guide, and this is published as HTML pages to a website, could be also private. It's not absolutely necessary that you do it, but I would say you see it in most projects. And on the other hand, next to this human readable documentation, you have the computable, processable content. And this is published as a FHIR NPM package. You have there all the conformance resources inside, the examples, and you can use that as the computable artifact. So you have always this web page with the readable things, and you have a package which you can use for validation, etc. We see this afterwards. And such an implementation guide can look like this. There are different layouts, different things. If they are published as a website, this allows searching, so no more searching in PDF or Word document. You can directly search it with the search engine. It allows you also to refer to text or examples or descriptions directly in the IG. So if it's published, I can enhance my code or even ask or refer to the documentation to specific parts of a page. Most often, implementation guides are also versioned. You see a version and you have some kind of directory of public versions, so you compare changes between different editions. And if it's in active development, often these implementation guides have also a continuous integration build where you see the latest activity. And there are different toolings to create implementation guides. Some of the toolings, they are the source of the implementation guide is directly also under version control. And this gives you also quite a powerful method to see what kind of changes it is. If you know the source, a lot of these implementation guides are based on GitHub. And for example, this one here is one which is created with FHIR, which is one of the toolings which allow you to create implementation guide. You can then compare directly, for example, between versions, what has changed directly on the source level. And this gives you a powerful way to keep track of suddenly added new features to implementation guides or things which are documented. Where do I find such implementation guides? I would say there are mainly two registries. There is one registry from the FHIR community itself, where they can enlist implementation guides. The current list is about 200 implementation guides. There are national-based implementation guides from countries, and you can sort it by different areas. Another way where you can find implementation guide or the corresponding package is the HL7 FHIR package registry. This is available on the registry FHIR.org, and in there you have also a list and can filter and sort all the different packages which you can find. You see this number is a little bit higher than the other one, so this is like a bit coming from a different audience, but I would say you should find most of the implementation guide in one of those two packages if they are meant to be public accessible. We have different types of implementation guide. We already saw you have some kind of national base, national implementation guides, then we have use case specific implementation guide, and then we have implementation guides which can just be done from an organization or for a specific use case. So the implementation guide get the more narrow and the more detailed specified, the lower you go. On the other hand, you have some kind of international specification like the IPS and APA, which have an influence. So you have quite a mix of different implementation guides. And you need to consider how you want to bring this into your development project. And that's what I would like to go through with you a little bit. How can I understand now all these different implementation guides? And we go quickly through different part, what consists of an implementation guide and what you can use this in the development. We pick one here, so we get to this registry, assuming MHD, mobile access to health documents. Then you see here afterwards a summary, what kind is this of an implementation guide. You see links to where you can find afterwards this implementation guide and how you can also download the implementation guide package. MHD is means mobile access to health documents. It is an IG developed by IAG International, the ITI, and it has mainly two use cases. You can push document entries to a receiving system, and you can list documents from a registry. So just publish document, read documents, nothing too complicated at first hand, but they this ITI has a long history of document sharing, and they wanted to do this also around those FHIR profiles. And what you have for such, or what you often have for such an implementation guide is you have use cases which describe you how you can use FHIR to support now that use case. Now, in the case of document sharing, there is a use case how you can publish new documents. Then you see different actors. You have, for example, a document source, and then you want to do a publication request, and you have an actor which is a document recipient. So the use cases define these actors and sequence diagrams. And now this is quite a textual descriptions, but now the implementation guide authors, they start to structure this information also in directly usable artifacts. So FHIR Release 4 introduced an example scenario where you can describe your use case in different steps. In Release 5, they introduced now these actor definitions. So in a future version, you will be able to use this and linked together. And they even start now with developing requirements resource, which you can now, the shalls and things you should do in an implementation guide also provide in a structured content. So these business requirements, they will also get more computable. This, you don't find this now in a lot of implementation guide, but this will come within future editions. And then the implementation guide packages together all the different conformance resources. And you have an implementation guide resource which refers to all the different implementation guide conformance resources that are profiles, which are represented as structure definition, capability statements, which defines the dynamic behavior. When we look now at one profile, they wanted to do a simplified publish, and it described the requirements, how this looks like now for this specific use case. So we have changements in cardinalities, there are stricter cardinalities, we have some terminology binding, we have business expression, and this you see all in this differential table, sorry, for this profile. And what you see also, and this is quite important if you start developing an implementation guide, you see must support. Must support is an element that gives you specific guidance what you should do as an implementer, and it can be different from the client side or the server side. IAG, for example, defined that must support is kind of a required if known. This is called the concept R2, but you can have to look it up. What is this in your implementation guide? And there will be some further evolution in FHIR Release 5. There are in the future additional obligations possible which you can add to these extensions. So this is something you have to watch out, will also come in the future. And these must support flags are always signed in this view with this red S, and there is next to the differential table also a key elements table, and this gives you a summary what all the most important fields, I would say, or data elements which you have to use for the development of your IGs. You would also have the snapshot table at the right, but this is such a long list that you will maybe never manage to get down on this. But this gives some kind of, I would say, if you start developing something, this is really the focus where you should look at. And then for each good practice is that for each profile which has been defined in the implementation guide, that there is at least one example. And you see that here. So for this profile, we have looked at it before. There is in an example, you have this in XML or JSON, and it just helps you quite a lot because you see already, I mean, everything is specified, but sometimes it's, oh, this is an OID. What kind of strange thing is this? How do I represent such a thing? And you can use this, and they are validated, so they are run through the process and are correct according to the specification of the authors. And you have not only data elements in an implementation guide, you have also extensions. They define the additional element which are required for this element, and also they are the implementation guide says where they can be used, and you have also examples for them. And when you have now all this example data, you can use this for different things in development. One which came as a first hand is you just can use it for unit tests in your application. This example data, you can upload the examples from the implementation guide to a server you have, or configure a server, sometimes even with an implementation guide, and can test maybe your application already with these examples. And one thing we see quite often in project is that your partner, which you want to make an interface, it is not yet ready. So what you can do is also, you can just use one of the test servers, upload your resource content, and mock your not yet here development partner and start trying to look if your things is working. If you are more adventurous, all these profiles and extensions, they are defined as structure definitions. So you can take all this information out and use that for code or interface generations. There are a few people doing this, but it has quite also some challenges. And one of the most important thing is you can validate your resources. There are also other talks. Vadim spoke yesterday already about validation, but I think it's something which speeds up your development things quite a lot if you can validate your output. There is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Postle's law, be liberal in what you accept and conservative in what you send. So, and I think this is something really important. If you produce information or produce the information for an exchange, please check that what you are producing is correct. And you have a lot of support also from FHIR tooling. You have a client-side validation support in the reference libraries. You have server-side validation support. There is a validator available from HL7 from the FHIR community, and even the FHIR servers have a $validate operation defined. So I think it's one of the most underestimated thing, or a lot of things you mean only in the backward. Oh, I didn't even check that my resource is not valid according to the implementation guide. Terminology, like we have extensions, we have a lot of additional terminology in implementation guides, use case specific. For example, the bindings can be stronger, something are required or extensible, which were only provided by an example. Or you have also value sets and code systems which are not directly available in the base standard. You see, for example, here for this MHD profile, they had added some additional codes. They added a value set and then binded it to a different code. And here it's a bit the same. So instead of using these codes and value sets from Excel sheets or PDF, you can directly import it because these value sets and code systems are provided within the implementation guide in this package. So you can use this, for example, to generate codes in your application or directly dynamically load in these value sets. There is one caveat a little bit. Value sets sometimes need to be expanded. So for example, you want to have certain codes from a SNOMED CT code hierarchy into your application, and this is only available at runtime. So you need to get all those codes, and then one possible way is to use a FHIR terminology server, where the terminology service is added that you then can directly get to this results. And an important point is also, if you use validation, you can most often configure the validation code also with which terminology server you want to use. So terminology validation is also available. And sometimes you have different code systems, value sets which you want to map in between. You have your internal system and you want them to map codes. And if the author of the implementation guide provides you already with this mapping, this is called a concept map resource, then you can also use this resource directly, programmatically, and don't write the code mapping yourself. What we have looked at here now are all the things which are more the content side of this implementation guide, but implementation guide defines additional conformance resources which might have an impact on your implementation as a developer. So you have search parameters which can be additionally defined, which you can use as a client. You have additional operation definitions that you can call specific functionality on a server. They come also with a profile sometimes that you can validate what you send into this operation and take out of these operations. And then finally, some implementation guides provide a capability statement, and the capability statement tells you what does a client or a server have some kind of requirements. Which resources do they support, which profiles, which operations, etc. And if you want to, there is even a Swagger definition where you can download the interface, and this should produce you the definition to this capability statement that you can afterwards directly execute it. Coming a bit more to testing, is implementation guide may also provide a section about test scope. In this example implementation guide, they just described it a bit on a high level, what kind of testing you could do and what kind of test tooling is available, but FHIR itself supports also testing conformance resources, and they can also be supplied with an implementation guide. Release 2 introduced test script, which is a way which can tell you kind of how this interface should work and how you can run a test against your implementation. In release 3, test report was introduced, which gives you that you can share the results of such different test script evaluation. And in release 5, a new risk conformance reduce test plan is introduced, which makes then a complex planning or testing possible. Richard will talk also about test-driven development this afternoon. We'll come up to the slide, and you can use these artifacts for your conformance testing or together with third-party tools. And then, as we have seen in this previous different world of different implementation guides, they depend on each other. So profiles can be derived from each other, and also this implementation guide are derived from other implementation guide or can be derived. This MHD implementation guide, for example, is derived from the terminology from HL7, then there are 2 others, IHE implementation guides. And this is something you can reflect also in your code base or with code generation, because you have all this reusability and inheritance. Coming then to this NPM FHIR package, this is it. So each implementation guide provides such a package, and in there you have now all the computable structure FHIR resources. You can download it directly from the website, or that's where you go through the registry. So it's based on the Node Package Manager system, and they are registry available, and there is tooling how you can get that package from the registry down to your computer that it can be used. So you see, you have the examples, and then when this is a tar file zipped. When you untar it, you get a package with the folder structure. You have examples inside, you have these OpenA definitions inside, and then what you see is the complete list of all those different conformance resources. You have the value sets inside, code systems, concept maps, so you can directly use this in your development environment if you have a need to. And I think what is quite important also is, since we have now these web-based specifications, we are getting a much closer engagement also with the author of a specification. So you see often a link at the bottom of the page, propose a change, and you can use that. You see some examples which don't work out good, which are or some value sets which might be not good for your use case. Please use that, because this increases also the communication and the feedback loop with the one who are authoring the specification. And I think that's one thing we also see it's quite much easier and faster if you have such web implementation guides. This feedback gets tracked. You see the changes coming to this issue generated and directly represented in your implementation guide. And that, I think, is about the main points I wanted to tell you from the side of implementation guides. So we have kind of a define, I think, this improvements that you have this not on paper or in a document form, but you have it computable, gives you a higher way of standardization and quality assurance. So you have a consistent specification for authors and developers. So they are looking at the same document or the same specification, and you can collaborate much faster. I think this time has been, or it's the first time in developing such applications that this gap is closing. So authors and developers get much faster together and can collaborate from the business rules until to the formal definitions. And those concepts, I think, are also very clearly differentiated. And another aspect of that is, I think you have through that also possibilities to do faster development, because you have these outputs, these conformance resources, which you can also for your use case. You can use that for this code generation, you can use it for testing, you can use it for validation, and I think this increases also quite a lot that you have much less development time for certain tasks. And this consistency around publication formats and cycles gives you kind also for a predictability. So if you have seen once an implementation guide and you have to make an implementation guide for another FHIR implementation guide, you see, I know already I have those things there, I have those things there, I can expect that, and I know also how that whole process works. If you are interested in, there are 2 additional presentations this week around this topic. There's one I mentioned shortly before from Richard. This is this afternoon, improving developer satisfaction with test-driven implementation. I think he will go deeper into how you can use these different test script resources or resources in that way for using. And there is also another burst of a further presentation from Gino and Ewout, how to generate open API representations. I think, or I hope they use also the implementation guide artifacts to do that, but we'll see tomorrow. This will be tomorrow. That's already the end. I tried to put up a first poll. What helped you most for your FHIR development from a FHIR implementation guide? I don't know if you put a result there. Free results, so maybe you can add. Dev pipelines, examples. Oh, not much else, but I leave the room up otherwise for additional input from you. What you see, if I missed something, background of this talk was this Zulip discussion which came up here. So if you want to go deeper in this Zulip discussion, or otherwise I'm interested in your comments or feedback.
Great. Thank you so much, Oliver. I think we wanted to leave some time for Q&A. And so does anybody have any questions from within the room? Right up here.
You mentioned using examples as unit tests, but how do you deal with the negative examples? So things that break, because positive examples, that's easy, but it's the negative examples that are interesting. And then your IG has warnings, so that's...
Yes, yeah. I think there was once an initiative to mark examples as negatives, that you can provide negatives and examples to an implementation guide. I'm not 100% sure if this is already in the IG publisher. You know it?
I haven't played with it yet, but I know there's a feature where you do not do validation on this thing.
Yeah.
So you can mark resources.
Repeating that in there, sorry.
Sure. So in the IG publication tooling, there's flags that you can set. There's configuration options, so you can specify these resources are not to be validated. So you can make a bad resource in that particular case. I don't have that configuration off the top of my head, but I know it's something that you can work with.
And you are a bit limited in the negative examples because, I mean, if you make negative examples in the sense that they are not valid to your implementation guide, but valid FHIR examples, then that works. You have just to ignore the errors. But if you want to have really invalid examples, then you have to provide them in your testing stack. This is not possible currently. It's a good point.
In our project, negative examples are a big issue. Is it possible to mark a resource, a FHIR resource, patient, whatever, as negative resource?
No, I think I will have to follow up. There was once a discussion how to do it. I don't remember it out of the hand, but we can find this out, yes.
Okay.
One in the back, sorry. Right back.
On the positive examples, where do they come from? Are they uploaded with the IG?
Yeah.
And are they expected to be sufficient for all testing purposes? I guess, excluding negatives. Is there a tool that can automatically generate synthetic data based on an IG? would it be useful to have one?
Oh, that's quite a lot of questions. So, I mean, first examples, if you are using the IG publisher tooling stack, you provide examples with your implementation guide. So this is the authors who write the examples. They should be complete. So the quality guidelines tell you that you should have an example for each resource profile you do, but in the end, it's up to the authors how deep they go into the examples. In terms of creating automatic examples, I think this is a very good discussion, or a very interesting discussion also, because there is a project, Cynthia, which made test data, creation data, but this is then just general patient data and related to US population. And there are discussion initiatives how you can generate also test data for your implementation guide. Josh Mandel, he tried to create examples with the help of ChatGPT and then let it through the validator. So if you're interested in that, I think he documented it up on Zulip also, or you can ask me afterwards. I find it somewhere outside. There are different ways, but there is not kind of like an obvious way. There is some experimentation to it, and now it's mostly by the authors who have to write the examples.
I believe there's one up front.
So thank you for your good summary of key benefits. I would like to ask you if you should state, like, what are the key challenges when you work as a developer with a FHIR implementation guide?
I think, so depending a little bit, I think it's the ramp-up time. If somebody is new to FHIR, or a developer is new to FHIR, or maybe even new to the interoperability health market, it takes some time until a developer gets used to all those FHIR concepts. I mean, they are close, but sometimes even, or I encounter in discussion that implementers are confusing profiles with new resources, so that the profile is more kind of an interface than a new class or something like that. So these are mostly the issues I see, but I think as soon as somebody got that knowledge of FHIR and what kind of restrictions an implementation guide imposes, I think the barrier is much lower.
Hello. Is it possible to have multi-language versions of an implementation guide? So you can have an international version and a localized, e.g., German version of an implementation guide for more easy access without having exactly two separate implementation guides?
Yeah, this is current ongoing work. So the HL7 organization has a project with the WHO where they want to or have funding for that the publishing stack can work with different versions. And I think there is even a talk this week from Graham about that. So the idea is that you have one main language which you define the implementation guide, and you provide the translation to the different languages for that. And this is currently in development and should come within, so we are trying it out also in Switzerland for that. Yeah, it's not yet there, but it will come within the next month, I would say.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions from within the room? Anything? If not, I think thank you all so much for joining the session. Thank you, Oliver. Please give him a round of applause. And yeah.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy your lunch.